we can try to do some of this on the fly, or we can focus on the developing the OKRs for today, and then try it again at our next meeting, and I will send reminders. And then I was hoping if Alexander had joined us, we're also still trying to do some coordination with Arenska, you and Anik relative to your plans for meeting in March. And so I don't know if you saw the email from him about some other groups he's been in touch with the mapping. So I was going to ask him about, I know there's the thought of you coordinating relative to tools, but then we would want to coordinate them too relative to the proposal. So I was going to ask him about that, but it does not look like he's able to join us today. So I'm thinking maybe our OKRs are our best option for good use of time. Does anybody else disagree or have some examples? Yeah, Piper?
So can we talk through a little bit about what our goals are around the questions, answers, facts? So you mentioned several things at the start of the call, and I want clarity on exactly what we're doing there.
Okay, yeah. So we've had a lot of talk, and Alexander shared some of the slides. I went into this a little bit more about some of the challenges, that we've always been talking about with mapping the surveys, because we desire to keep the question answer pairs. We want to be able to do no's, like record negative responses. And sort of the approach of recording the question answer pairs alone with a what's what I'm looking for, condition or measurement type thing, like what Stephanie's group has been working on with the AI Ready, or instances where these things might be done separately, where you only care about the question answer pair, or you only care about the fact. So, and again, those questions: has a healthcare provider ever told you have, asthma? And then basically, I just want to know that the participant reported asthma. So I'm mapping it more like we traditionally map the EHR data. So those are sort of scenarios. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So when you say fact, the fact is the actual clinical meaning that we derive from the question answer pair.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so I was thinking about this because, and I don't know if this maybe ties into our OKRs, but I was sort of, as I was going through the mapping for some real world data this weekend, it occurred to me, so we sort of carved this out into like three major areas, right? There's that overall representation of the assessment instruments, right? The whole survey, questions, scores, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The other piece is the more detailed piece of how do we represent the questions, right? And that's what you're talking about, the questions, the answers, and then the facts. And then I would say like the third piece of it, which is maybe or maybe not the easy piece, is really filling the gaps, right? So we have all these instruments that are used in, routine practice or large scale research studies, and we really don't even have any standard codes for them. So, and I think for surveys, that's a little bit of a different issue than the psychometric instruments, because those in theory should be in LOINC. But so when we're talking about, when you asked about the graphics, a couple of slides, are you specifically talking about sort of building on that slide set that Alex put together of the questions, answers, facts, and then dealing with yes, no?
Yeah, so basically building out those items with actual use cases, so that we have examples of what we mean by each of these, like what it looks like with an actual like survey question from something someone's working on.
Gotcha.
And then you've touched on a couple other things that we've talked about storing, but haven't gotten into details with. So, we've talked about some sort of metadata file, whether is that a separate table listing information about um, the individual questionnaire, or is it something we just add to part of what we're mapping for a question? So I know we've wanted to, some of the things on our wish list were to keep track of like what the publicly named version of that survey is, who's collecting that data. So is it self-reported? Is it a clinician? Is it a family member? Who's actually populating the survey, were a couple of variables we talked about that we needed. And then the other thing that we haven't dug into yet is what Craig brought up last week about, do we need to preserve a hierarchy of these questions? And that sort of ties into the metadata, right? We have, this is the specific survey. This is, say the section on background health, and these are the questions in it, those types, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, how we would possibly preserve that as well. And again, is it built into the question mapping, or is it a separate table that you
Yeah.
link to the question mapping?
So, I would be inclined, and I'm curious about what others think or who's done any of this analysis yet, but I would be inclined to keep separate the how do we physically implement this in OMOP in terms of the data structures, to keep that separate from how do we represent these. You're talking about metadata, and I would
Right.
say that, whether I would say a lot of what you're calling metadata are features of the assessments, right? Attributes of the
Mm-hmm.
assessments. And I think that we definitely need to keep separate. We need to address separately the overall representation of a instrument, a survey, from representing each of the components. And the question answer component is the most complex component, or that's what we've talked a lot about so
Right.
far. Right. There's the other components like the subscales and the scores. And I think that that's easier, an easier thing. One of the prerequisite things I think we need to do is we need to look at the vocabulary files, right? And I've started to do this already, and maybe I can share this, Nicole, on our next
Okay.
call, or I could send it out to the
Yeah.
group. But one of the challenges we have is that we have different models, different ways of representing the relationships between the overall instrument, the subscales, the questions, the answers, depending on the source vocabulary, right? And so I think at the end of the day, one of our goals is we need a standard representation of surveys, right? How OMOP is going to represent it. And we need to be able to harmonize the LOINC representation, the SNOMED representation, the PPI biobank, right? Because right now we have a whole bunch of different relationships in there. And this
What's
would
the
probably
bank you just mentioned, Piper?
PPI or
Yeah.
biobank. Yep,
Yeah.
PPI.
Biobank I'm familiar with. PPI,
Okay.
was that the All of Us study?
I think PPI is all of us. Yeah.
Okay.
It started out with a different name.
Yeah.
Shoot, let me look. I'm gonna look because it's on my other computer. Maybe I can pull up a graphic just to show you, because I started to look at this. And I think if you see the picture, it makes more sense.
And that's
Um,
part of what we're talking about with the vocabulary group, is like, what's the pipeline for adding vocabulary? And I think one of the things that is challenging is, where are things duplicated and how do we dedupe? So
yeah.
from what, from these sort of customized or personalized vocabularies that have been added, just to get through the process of mapping a specific project so that we can move from doing this at a specific project level to allowing multiple surveys to use the vocabulary and be harmonized together. And then I also wanted to ask, so like you said, we've been focused a lot on the question answer issues, but for the scores or sub-scores, those are things that mostly already exist in LOINC and SNOMED. Is that correct?
In theory, they should, but
Okay.
yes, there's a way to capture those in LOINC and in SNOMED. And it's just not, the content hasn't been added. So that's what I would say is the simpler problem, of
Yeah,
fill in the
theoretically
gaps,
simpler.
right? Yeah, we don't need to come up with a new model or anything. We just need to request the content.
Yeah.
So,
And then Ella, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry, my video is not working. I'm not sure what happened, but I wanted to ask about vocabulary. When you're talking about vocabulary regarding surveys, is it medical or clinical coding, or vocabularies like a SNOMED or ICD, or you're talking about general vocabularies? What do you mean by that?
I would say all of the above, so there's some things that, yeah, I know that's a helpful answer, but, there's some things that are definitely clinical findings, right? Somebody reports a specific disease or disease history, and I'm sorry, these are the ones that keep coming back to, but even things like people self-report weight or BMI or blood pressure, all things like that, I think are also things that are typically taken in the more traditionally mapped EHR and claims data. And those would be clinical mappings that could be ICD codes or SNOMED or LOINC. But then we also have a lot of questions that are, self-reported, or collected by somebody else, but from the patient or participant's perspective, that aren't necessarily usually logged as clinical findings. And so those are going to be vocabulary that are not necessarily currently in something like SNOMED or LOINC. And that's why a lot of studies like UK Biobank and all of us have requested, their own vocabularies be added to the Odyssey tooling, is to include those types of terms that aren't included in the typical clinical mapping.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarification, like patients may have different descriptions of their situation and state, and they may use different words. So is there any kind of like a standardizing, as you were mentioning, all the words that may come, that may mean or can be interpreted to something as one standardized, let's say, word or vocabulary?
Yeah, and if others want to chime in who've done more of this hands-on, feel free to. So, at this point, we're really trying to make recommendations at a high level. Like, these are best practices for trying to do this. Only the studies that are like in progress, who've been trying to do this on their own for so long, can explain kind of how they went through the mapping process. How do you, standardize your age groupings and things like that, where you can find multiple categories and try to roll things up, or in some cases add to it because it's not covered. A lot of the instruments we're talking about are not free text responses. So in terms of, variation from the person who's self-reporting, that kind of minimizes it. But we do have verification or variation in how each survey asks the question. So one survey might be specific enough to say asthma, another survey has lung disease, which is a much broader category, that asthma would fit under. So, that's where some of the harmonization challenges come in, but you also find those challenges in the medical records as well.
Okay.
What level code they use to describe the condition.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
And if anyone else has anything to add, feel free. Okay. Piper, did you find the figure you were looking for? And if you're talking, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to switch computers. No, I'm still digging. Give me one more
Oh,
minute,
okay.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm so good at my filing system. I put things, I file them so carefully, I can't even find them when I need them. So
Yeah, that's what I do that with real life objects. Like I put it in a safe place and it's so safe, I don't even know where it is. Yeah.
I always park my car in the same spot at work because
Yeah.
won't be going home otherwise.
Yeah, I work from home now, but we have like where I was working before is a 4-story garage. And if my usual parking space wasn't available on the floor I normally parked on, I would always forget if I moved it up a floor. I'd be like, wait a minute, why isn't my car here? Did somebody steal my car? And then it's like, hello, you parked a floor up.
So while Piper is looking through her incredible filing system, have we ever, as an Odyssey community, tried to reach out to the organizations that make all these great questionnaires and do not harmonize their own questionnaires with questionnaires that already are out there and decide that they will formulate their question in a negative way instead of somebody else having formulated it in a positive way, but meaning the same thing, but it might end up being different. Have we ever reached out and to them and say, can you map to OMOP for us? I think there's been some initiatives towards ICHOM but not very successful.
That would be nice. I think, doing the work we're doing now to set up best practices would at least put us in a better position to give them, we have these things for you. Now, could you please do this?
True.
But it would be nice. And I'm also hoping as, with, Connect and all of us and, I don't know if anyone else in the group represents stuff that's under NIH. But I'm also really helping we start doing it internally. We've got the thesaurus. I think OMOP needs to be a bigger part of the thesaurus, and start being the go-to when people develop something new. And one of the things we've been trying to do with Connect is we built our questionnaire, I guess, development software in-house. It's open source. And, right now you basically have to go in and code the questions with kind of a markup, and then it renders the survey and also renders what the back end will look like. So things are stored in a JSON file hierarchically, which is really nice. One of my hopes for this software is to create a library. So where we basically link a question with its markup, with its back end, and then people can kind of self-assemble. And when people use that resource or add to it, once we're mapped to OMOP, then by default, they'll be building things that are mapped to OMOP. But I think that's probably a couple years out, both, getting through this year with getting our best practices together, and then convincing the powers that be to invest some coding in this. So it's been on my wish list for a while, but it's like once we developed the app, it's like, okay, we can pause now and just make questionnaires. But the cadence of making questionnaires is slowing down. So I'm hoping maybe we can step back, take a step back and develop that library.
Oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, it's a goal. Yeah, Ella?
Yeah, Nicole, That's great. Would you please elaborate on this software you're talking about? What are the process, like how it processes the data or the mapping you're talking about?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So it's called Quest, Quest, all caps. I don't think it's an acronym for anything. We just, short for questionnaire and the quest that it was to put this thing together. I'll put the link in the chat later because I have to dig it up. So basically the way it works is you take, your traditional or paper written questionnaire, and there's a wiki that goes through how you translate that to how you want it rendered. So you can render multiple choice, select all, that apply. You can pipe in answers from previous questions. So like, you reported you were diagnosed with asthma. What medications have you taken for asthma? Those types of things. You can pipe things into it. We have some very complicated skip logic that we're able to do with it, and things like that. But so basically, if you were to start with a questionnaire, you'd have your questions. We have a list of question types. So determining what markdown is needed for your question is based on your type of question. So you assign multiple choice, select all that apply, yes, no, what, or sometimes we have a combo where it's one of these things, and if not, it's other, then you can fill in the blank, although I try to minimize those, but we have basically different markup that goes for that. The next thing you do after you've determined question type is you create the data dictionary. And so that's basically putting, the questions and the responses in a dictionary format. And then in that format, it's assigned concept IDs. And so for us within Connect, the concept IDs are self-generated. We have not harmonized these to anything yet, but they allow us to harmonize with ourselves. So for example, all our yes, nos in the entirety of Connect have the same concept ID. So it keeps us from proliferating concept IDs because we do this hierarchically, but it also gives us consistency. Like all our age groups are always the same concept ID, things like that. And part of the thinking was that, again, it would help us harmonize internally, but it also help harmonize externally because we've been consistent with how we use terms. So once you have the concept IDs, then that becomes part of the markup. And then once your question is marked up and rendered, when the answers are entered, the answers are automatically stored under the appropriate concept IDs. And so then you've got a JSON file with all of your questionnaire data nested under the appropriate concept ID, and you're basically ready to roll with your analytics. So it's really helped us go from collecting the data to analyzing it much more quickly than the traditional paper questionnaires where you have to hand enter the data, or other systems where you might collect things as categorical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then you have to go back and be like, well, what does that mean? So it's just given us a nice way to be consistent and store that data.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Thanks.
Good. Yeah. And I'm happy to share the link. We're happy to have people try it out. Right now, the Generations study in England is using it for their questionnaire. So it's nice to have people outside the system trying to do this to give us some feedback. All right, Piper, it looks like you're ready for us.
I found it.
All right.
All right. All right. So if you look at OMOP, so I went through the vocabularies and I looked at the assessment related or survey related concept classes. And then I looked at the vocabularies that contain assessment instruments. So I actually kind of started here and then went here. But if you look, we have like a variety of classes. So there's a staging and scales class, and that's what OMOP uses for SNOMED assessments, and then also for the OMOP extension. And then you'll have the exact same instruments, same scales or surveys in both SNOMED and LOINC. And LOINC represents it using the survey class. And the modeling, right? The way SNOMED models assessments and the way Loink models assessments and the way CDISC models assessments, that's persisted in the vocabulary files. Okay, so the classes we have are staging and scales, survey, PPI, which is all of us, uses the concept of module and topic for the assessments. And then we have question source, answer. So these are the concept classes. And then if you look at the vocabularies that contain assessment instruments, it's these, LOINC, SNOMED, CDISC, PPI, UK Biobank. We need to look some more because there might be some others, but let me show you what I've been trying to do to sort of make sense of these, right? So if you look, because at the end of the day, what we're going to have to do in OMOP is we're going to have to come up with a standard way of representing the surveys, the scores, the questions, the answers, right? So this isn't something that the vocabulary team has done yet. So as a really simple example, we often have, if we have the same assessment instrument in both LOINC and SNOMED, we will have standard concepts for both. So it kind of violates the rules that we've set forth, which is for every real world thing, right? There is one and only one standard concept in SNOMED, or I'm sorry, in OMOP. And the way that we get there when we have the same thing in multiple vocabularies is we say, okay, so when it comes to assessments or surveys, we're going to designate vocabulary X as our standard vocabulary. And then you essentially harmonize the other vocabularies so that they to what you pick as the standard. So a simple example is what we do with disorders or conditions, right? SNOMED is the standard vocabulary. So every ICD code ultimately is represented. The standard concept for that is in SNOMED. So the first step in getting here, the first step in identifying which vocabulary is going to be our standard for surveys and assessments is to look at the existing vocabularies, right? So we have SNOMED, staging and scales. We have LOINC, which uses the survey class for the top level. OMOP extension uses staging and scales. PPI, question source, is the equivalent of the survey, right? They call it question source. So I haven't gotten through all of these, but if we think about a survey, which I just kind of refer to them generically as instruments, these are the components we have. We have an instrument. We may or may not have subscales or subparts, right? Nicole, like you were talking about a survey where there might be a section. In fact, that's probably a good term for it. It's either a subscale or a section. And then you have either items or questions, right? Because there's not always questions. Sometimes it's an item like on a cognitive exam that says, draw a picture of a clock, right? Or do a certain, stack these blocks in a certain order. And then we have an answer. We have scores. We also have, and then we have interpretations. So Nicole, that's what you're saying as the fact, right? We might have a question, an answer, and the other piece is the answer list, right? So answer list.
Oh, just a sec, Piper. Renska, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. This is really helpful though. This is very, I think it's
It
very
is.
good. But what I was wondering, and I know I'm going to say something and people are going to shoot me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel this is a safe space.
No shooting here.
Yeah, no shooting.
Can we?
No
Not
shooting
even
allowed.
finger guns. Yeah.
Can we not like add some of the like the EORTC, for example, as a standard vocab, like some of the instruments that we are using to measure the proms or whatever.
Yes,
And
you're
do they not,
right.
I mean, they don't all have to go to SNOMED, right? I mean, I think we
No.
could choose one or two and say, okay, so from now on, we're going to try to map a new instrument that comes up to EORTC or to one of the other ones that's already in there that's become standard.
So, and so you make a really good point. I think there are some others that I'm probably not familiar with. So this one is a collection of surveys, right? Or is it a
Yeah.
master survey?
It
Okay.
is, I think it's a collection. I know that they have them for like specific cancer domains.
Okay. Are there, so thank you for raising this. This is a really important point. So I think what we need is sort of a systematic process. So I kind of did this based on an informal search and then sort of filed this away as one of the many papers and projects that we need to undertake using like formal methodology. But so this needs to be fleshed out. We need to identify where in OMOP do we have any vocabularies that either contain or are designed specifically for only assessments or surveys, right? And then from there, so again, I looked at the vocabularies that were in OMOP and I said, okay, what are the concept classes that are used to represent parts of these instruments or surveys, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
makes
guess
sense.
it would be helpful if you have a new survey,
Yep.
to then look at the table that you had before and say, okay, so I've got this and this. So I've got, for example, I've got a scale and I've got an answer list, whatever. And then you can go through here and say, oh wait, that means I most fit CDisc, for example. That's most
Yeah.
comparable to what I'm doing. So you can kind of like use that as a reference or something.
Yeah. So, so I think what I'm proposing, and I don't know if this is the right way to go or not, and I don't know how much work would be involved in doing this, but what I'm proposing, and I want to put your OR, is it CTR? No.
EORTC.
Okay. ERORTC.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there were a couple others. There's this SEAL vocabulary and MESH. And I excluded MESH. MESH does have some representation of standardized assessment instruments, and SEAL does as well. I might revisit SEAL because I excluded it because they weren't psychological tests, but they might be surveys. So we might want to include those. So here's what I'm proposing. And again, this may or may not be the best way to go. I think we need to start with an analysis because I'm proposing that we come up with a standard representation of assessment instruments in OMOP. And that we then, when we ingest the source vocabularies like SNOMED, LOINC, EORTC, they each have their own representation, but we then essentially harmonize those or map those. We represent those using a standard model because that's the only way we'll be able to create tooling, right? Efficiently create tooling to go against any assessment or scale. Right now, our tooling would have to have a way to retrieve things or aggregate things based on each of the discrete models. So I think we do need a standard model. And the reason I think that this is worth exploring is because that is what OMOP has done already with other content, right? Like procedures and procedures, disorders, findings, measurements. They've identified a standard vocabulary, and then all the content that is represented using that standard, the selected standard vocabulary. So, and I'll pause maybe right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in there. I don't
Yeah.
think what you're saying is even up for discussion. I mean, if we want to have standard analytics, we have to have the data represented in exactly the same way, otherwise the analytics are not going to work. So the surveys have got to be modeled in the same way, and that we use different vocabularies, that's going to be okay. But they've got to have exactly the same format, otherwise we can't do the analytics.
Yes.
So
Yes,
that's definitely something we have to go for.
Okay, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're not
so-
out of the blue thinking here, Piper.
Okay, because sometimes I do. Sometimes I go a little bit out there in my thinking. So yeah, I mean, the challenge then is we need to harmonize to a standard model.
Mhm.
So how do we do that? And this is our first step, right? So step one is let's look, and there might be other stuff out there that's not yet been integrated into OMOP, but let's start with what we currently have in OMOP, and let's systematically identify the vocabularies, right? Which are the vocabularies that exist in OMOP that have standard assessment instruments, or components, right? And then let's look at the classes, the assessment related concept classes. That's step one. Step two is, okay, well, we know we're moving towards a standardized representation of assessment instruments. And I would say that these fields over to the right represent the standard components. And I might be missing some, right? But I think right now, it's the instrument, the section or the subscale, the questions, the answer list, the scores, and again, the interpretation, right? And the interpretation is what you're describing, Nicole, as the fact
Right.
for a question. But then we also have a score interpretation, right? A score of X on the PHQ-9 means this. So we may or may not have two different ideas for interpretation, right? Score versus question interpretation. But in any case, and just for full disclosure, I have been working on I have a grant to develop a standard assessment instrument concept model. And so I'm drawing very heavily on that model. And I'm hoping that maybe that model might be one that we could implement in OMOP. But, okay, so again, stepping back, step one, identify the concept classes, identify the vocabularies, current vocabularies. Step two, we're going to take each of those vocabularies and we're going to take each of the concept classes and we're going to say, hey, in this standard model, in this standard model, what do these represent? And in some cases, like staging and scales, that's both instruments and subscales, right? So we may separate that out. In LOINC has the instruments, the subscales, and the items are all part of this survey class. So let's just see what these all map to. And the reason that this step is important is because ultimately what we're going to do, I think, is we're going to harmonize each of these vocabulary specific representations, right, or models to our standard model. So there's going to be a conversion that happens. And I think that conversion happens when the OMOP vocabulary team actually ingests the source data, right? So just like OMOP ingests new ICD concepts, right? And then maps those to SNOMED concepts, and then specifies which one is standard and which one is non-standard. That same sort of process would happen with surveys. So I'll
Yeah.
stop there. I'll stop there.
I'm not sure if I fully agree with you that they would need to map to SNOMED. I'm still gonna put my vote in for standard survey vocabulary, but that's up to the
Yes.
vocab team, I think, how
Yes.
far they want to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
one
so
other,
to clarify, I wasn't saying, so I was saying just like I was using the example of
okay,
findings for SNOMED. No,
yeah,
I
okay.
don't think it would be SNOMED. If one of our vocabularies here actually had a full representation, then it would make sense to use that vocabulary as the basis, right? So SNOMED has a really good full representation of clinical findings. And I think that that's why the OMOP vocabulary team chose the SNOMED model to sort of map to and then for medications, of course, we use RX norm, right? Because RX norm has the most robust representation so that the vocabulary team was able to harmonize the medication models for all of the source medication vocabularies to RX norms, to RX norm. For our purposes, right now, there isn't one. So I do think that our only option when it comes to surveys and assessments is to create an OMOP specific standard model to harmonize to.
But
Yeah,
that
regarding-
model, oh, go ahead, Renska.
No, go ahead, Nicole, because my question's on something different.
Okay. So, and then I would say, so that model though, might be a mix of different source vocabularies, like whatever on this list best represents that particular area.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep. So you know how over to the right, those were the columns that showed the different components. We need a model that represents the relationship. We have an assessment instrument, and then we have all of the components of an assessment instrument and the relationship of those components to the overall instrument. And that's what we need to we build. And it's essentially like assessment instrument, has subscale, right? We'll have an assessment instrument, we'll have a subscale or a section, right? And an item, and we'll say this section or subscale is part of, right? Or is part of instrument, and an instrument has section or has subscale. So we create those relationships. And so actually, I'll show you, this was the other piece, and I have not gotten very far on this yet. Are you seeing the document again?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the concept classes, but this is the relationship matrix, right? So I've not gotten very far at all on this piece, but I need to pull out, or we need to, again. So Nicole, this goes back to our other paper. There are so many projects, or, there's so much work that we need to do, and it's, we need to identify folks who have the time and bandwidth and interest in doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
maybe that
I
ties
agree.
into-
This is not gonna, although you've done an amazing amount of work, Piper, but no, this shouldn't be all on you to figure out, but it's awesome to have what you've created as a reference and a starting point for all of this. But yeah, we definitely need to get more assistance and buy-in. I do know the vocabulary group is very interested in this. I think we're definitely going to have members of the vocabulary group who want to to work on, you know, the vocabulary aspects of it. And then, you know, and then we'll have to go from there. But yeah, you know, and this is something we started talking about last year too, is trying to sort of get enough membership or interest that we could maybe start dividing into smaller work groups that tackle specific bits of this, because we do have a lot of ground to cover, to try to come up with our OMOP model for surveys and our best practices and stuff. And I think, yeah, it's a lot to do. We need to figure out how we can spread it out. And I know, Renska, you're already working with Anik on the tooling part of it. So I think we need more people on the model vocabulary end. I think vocabulary will come from the vocabulary group. Is there anybody on the call now who wants to be part of the best practices modeling discussions? Okay, Ella, are you volunteering or did you have a question?
No, I'm volunteering.
Oh, great.
As you
Yay,
mentioned.
thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also willing to help out any way I can.
Oh, great, Diane. I appreciate that, especially with the work you've been doing on your surveys. Okay, good. So we've got the kickoff meeting for drafting the proposal. I think it's next week. And I think from there, hopefully, Anna and I still need to work on an agenda. But I think one of the things that would be nice to come out of it is sort of division of labor and then figuring out where we need to assign or recruit people for each of those areas. So thank you for volunteering. It will follow up after we have our kickoff meeting. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Is there any of this discussion we want to continue? Do we want to take a quick look at the OKRs, or do we want to call it a day and have 10 minutes before our next meeting? I am good with any of the above.
Can I just make one more comment about something Piper said?
Sure.
Piper, you indicated that we need to look at the vocabularies that are now in there to kind of like see what the common ground is. But I'm wondering if that's going to be enough, because I feel that the instruments are in there now are probably the ones that were easy to implement, or there was some other incentive. So it might be a little bit of a bias that the really difficult instruments are not in there, and we might want to tackle those as well. So I think we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of, yeah, maybe some of the more complex ones.
Yeah, that's a great point. Are there, I mean, can you think of examples of instruments that are out there that are not, I mean, are you talking about other vocabularies that have instruments, or are you talking about actual just instruments that aren't modeled anywhere right now?
Yeah, just the actual surveys or instruments.
Yeah.
This is so not my field, right? So this is all new stuff for me. But
Yeah. Yes.
We have a
Yeah.
wide range of instruments that we've seen off and on. I can try to come up with maybe some more of the more convoluted ones, I guess, where it's not a straightforward question answer kind of idea, if that's helpful. I assume that's what you meant by that. Okay.
And Diane, would these be instruments that are used maybe like they're not sort of publicly named instruments? They're like study specific or organization specific?
No, these are more disease specific, I guess, but they are validated instruments. So
Oh, okay.
they'll be, but they will be disease specific to what we look at. You know, we look at some rare diseases, we look at some neurodevelopment diseases, diabetes, things like that. So they would be along those trains of thought.
Okay.
And we
Yeah, that would
also
be
do a
great.
lot of functional tests, which I don't know if we want to include in this first pass, but they might be slightly different enough that they might be interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, and
So,
those are in CDisc, right? Nicole, do you remember when we were looking at for that
Yeah.
first draft of the landscape? Yeah. So we
Yeah, I'm
kind of,
also on the CDISC QRS team,
oh,
so
awesome, awesome.
um, I can help maybe give some insight into any of those that you're interested in.
and Diane, just to make sure I'm understanding, so when you're thinking about functional tests and using me as an example, because I've been doing physical therapy, so it's sort of the list of things they like ask you, how do you feel when you blah, or are you able to do X? Is that what you're talking about with functional, or is it something else?
Well, they are instruments that you have to do something physical, like,
Okay,
you know,
gotcha.
a 6-meter walk. Um, what else? They have a lot of like tapping functional tests for muscle diseases and things like that. So it's something that you as the patient have to physically do. You have to
Okay,
walk somewhere. You have to physically pick something up and put it somewhere else. So that's kind of what I'm using as a functional
okay,
test.
yeah, I gotcha. And yeah, I have to do that too. So that makes sense. Yeah, so
Yeah,
basically she records like how I do it or whatever, and then how long it takes. And I do
yep,
physical therapy for, I get vestibular migraines. So that's what I'm doing it for. So a lot of it's like balance type
got
stuff.
it.
And then how long it takes me to get back to normal after doing something that like stimulates the vertigo.
Oh,
So yeah,
yes,
and then she like comes up with a score, and then we can see if my score improved since last time and all that
exactly.
good
Yep,
stuff. Yeah.
yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I definitely think they qualify in the scope of things we're calling instruments, right? It's just clinician reported. Um, but yeah, we have to figure out sort of what the scope. Let me try to say, we want to figure out what our scope is for this first round, but we also don't want to define any best practices or model that would not work with things, specific use cases we may not be using right away. So, I mean, there are things about that fit in with psychometrics in the sense that you're doing scores and scales and things like that. So it may not be that different, but I definitely think we want to look as broadly as possible. And again, we're likely to mess up. We're doing this for the first time. I think we just have to be willing to do something and know we may be redoing it. But in so much as we can, not come up with rules that will exclude, or when I do it with coding, I say code yourself into a corner where you fix one thing and break 52, or you fix one thing, but you can't build on
Yep,
past that. So,
makes sense. Yep.
yeah. Yeah, that was one of the great funs of developing Quest. We had too inexperienced of a coder put on at first, and DevOps is supposed to have sort of this fail fast rule, but for whatever reason, they did not remove him. So we spent a great deal of time undoing things he did. He'd fix one thing and then not be able to like expand the use case or build anything out from it. And it took a while to fix that. So it's something I'm
I
hyper
can
aware of now.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yep.
So make sure your solution does not keep you from having other solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, all right. Well, this has been a great discussion. I'm excited. I feel like we're getting some real traction and getting more solid ideas. And um, especially thank you to Piper for writing these things down and talking us through them. And so some of you I will see on the kickoff call next week, but I will definitely keep everyone in the loop as we go through it. And of course, there'll be multiple opportunities for feedback or helping us build things out. And then I will post the link to Quest for anyone who's interested in seeing how we use this or how this works. And I'll also give you guys links to our surveys and our data dictionary so you can kind of see how we work with Quest if working on questionnaires is something you're doing, and again, not necessarily wanting to use ours since we're not mapped to OMOP, but this may be a tool that we can eventually sort of repurpose for it. Once we figure out some other things, maybe actually do that library. So that's all I've got. Have a great rest of your week, and I will be in touch. Any end comments from anyone else?
Thanks, Nicole. Just we will receive. You said you will post them. May I ask, you will send us email, or where do you post?
I'll go ahead and do it in email, and then Michelle, can you add the links that I send to the minutes so they'll be in there too?
Yep.
All right, terrific. All right, there you go. We'll find them in multiple places. We try to put as much as possible for the wiki because that's like our public record of what we're doing. But I also like to send things on email just because then you don't have to hunt for it on the wiki. All right, well, have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Thank you.